Good morning, everybody! Unless, of course, you're watching this video in the evening. In that case, good evening, and you are watching Time Travel TV. And today we're talking about the age of silent film. Now, silent film is slightly misleading. You'd have never watched a film in silence. It would either have music being played in a gramophone, or by an orchestra in the posh theatres, or maybe even some actors speaking the lines. But you would have always had some sound going on. You could never hear a pin drop, unless you have very good hearing and somebody dropped a pin. So, how did it all start? It all started with our friend Thomas Edison, who you may know from inventing the light bulb. Now, he, among his friends and employees, invented something called the kinetoscope, which was a single view, so only one person could view it at once, and you'd look through the lens and you can see a short film of 1 or 2 minutes unfolding. What happened was, these two brothers in France called the Lumiere brothers got hold of this and said, we can do like way better than that, that's rubbish. So they invented something called the cinematogram. And this was a device which they can project a film onto a wall. So the first main public, they did do public viewings before this point, but the main one and the most famous one to members of the public was in 1895 in Paris. And the main film they showed was of a train arriving at a station. Now, many people said that what happened is that when they saw it, everyone ran out of the theatre thinking that the train was going to run them over. This is very unlikely because most of them would have been familiar with their invention, and also they were used to projectors projecting pictures anyway. So it was very unlikely this was the case. Anyway, so this became quite popular, but these were only films of everyday life, and they were only lasting a couple of minutes. Until a chap called Georges Méliès came along, who was also French. And by a mistake he once made, he was filming in Paris, his camera film jammed. And he realised that he could do something very exciting called editing. So what he did was he worked out that if he can edit various bits together, he could make stories, and much more complex stories than first done by Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison. So what happened was that he made a series of films in which he would do his magic tricks, because he was a magician, really. He was an entertainer, a magician by trade. And one of his most famous films was A Trip to the Moon, which we can see a clip from just here. So you may have watched that and thought that's pretty rubbish, but for 1902 that was absolutely amazing. The special effects were second to none. But that film was very short, it lasted under 20 minutes, which was the norm for back then because all films would be able to fit on one reel of film, which got the tin for one here. This isn't quite as old though as The Trip to the Moon. Anyway, so some Italian and French filmmakers decided to try and make longer films by making 4-reelers, which is fit on 4 reels of film, and show them in instalments. D.W. Griffith, who was a failed actor who came to filmmaking and made a lot of 1-reelers, decided to tear up the rulebook in 1915 by making the feature film, which was a film that lasted a lot longer and was the main feature, and you'd go just to see that one film, by making The Birth of a Nation, which was very historically important and very racist. It prompted the start of a formation of the KKK, but we won't talk about too much about that today because that's like a whole different subject. They also was the first film to have a sequel, with first of all The Birth of a Nation. Next year they made The Fall of a Nation. So the next big film development came with Thomas Ince, who applied Henry Ford's mass production of cars to film. Before you'd had one person doing everything, whereas he split up into 5 separate roles: the screenwriter, the director, the editor, the producer, and the studio head. This managed to make film production much more quickly and more efficiently. Remember, in the film industry, back in these days, time was money, and to be honest, time is still money. It was also the case at this time that film companies were bringing stars such as Gloria Swanson just here, or Charlie Chaplin, in order to bring in bigger audiences. Charlie Chaplin was particularly famous, and we'll talk about him now. He was an Englishman who came to America at the age of 19 and was spotted by a talent scout, and the rest is history. He became a very important actor and director as well. He was best known for his comedy films and his tramp-like character and use of physical theatre. Let's have a look at him just now. So as the silent era progressed, they started doing more and more ambitious films, for instance, epics like Ben-Hur. Now that was an American film, but it's important to remember, back in the age of silent film, language was not a barrier. So it was much more common to see French, Italian and German films. And one of the most famous, probably the most famous silent film of all time was a German film from 1927, and it's called Metropolis. Now, Metropolis was done in 1927, and that's really the pinnacle of what you could do with silent films. You can't really get any better than that. And the same year, The Jazz Singer came out, which was starring Elle Johnson, who was probably as famous as Charlie Chaplin at the time. And that was the first major synchronised sound film. And everything went downhill from there with silent films. The actors struggled with the transition. Most of the silent film actors didn't go on to do much with sound film, mainly because the acting was different. In silent films, you have to do big gestures to make up for the lack of sound, but you're able to be more subtle in synchronised sound films. Gloria Swanson struggled with such quite a bit. She appeared in films with a couple of rising stars. For instance, one of them was Laurence Olivier, who went on to do loads, except Gloria Swanson didn't. Although her career did take a bit of an uptick in 1950 with the film Sunset Boulevard. Anyway, the silent film never really came back again. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to Time Travel TV, and cheerio!